Hey, look, really nice to see you. Most people on the left, so I might end up having to spin around a little bit. This is part of what we want to kind of do on a really regular basis, and this is something that we tried to do last year, but obviously COVID kind of got in the way a little bit. And it's part of the board being really transparent around everything, really. So we've got a few slides, which, to be honest, for staff, we've talked about some of these, so some of it you have heard before. There'll be some other information that you may not have seen, but really it's a really open kind of process. I'll talk through the slides, I'll pause now and again. If you've got questions, please just throw them out. I don't really want it to be the John McCaskill Smith lecture series. It would be really great if we could make it a bit of an interactive kind of sharing of kind of information and stuff in terms of the school. Now, I'll make sure that's working. So these are the kinds of things that we're going to kind of look over, and some of these, as I said, we've talked about internally, but we are meeting with parents after this, and some of the information that we will be covering off in this, parents haven't kind of had the opportunity to kind of talk through the information or ask questions kind of about it. So look, this is also covering a 2-year period. So looking back and looking at the kind of results, I think, as we've expressed to you guys before, you guys are the reason that we managed to achieve the great things that we did. So, if we look at the academic results, they were pretty amazing. When you think about COVID and the amount of online learning and other elements, other things that were kind of thrown at us during that kind of time. And so we really want to kind of, thank you again for enabling that to occur. And, on behalf of families, but also the students, really, it's your guys' commitment to teaching and learning that kind of makes that happen. So thank you for that. There was the chitty chitty bang bang, and I was going to kind of say without the extra bang at the end, but I wasn't quite sure whether that was too soon to kind of make that kind of statement. But, it was great that we managed in the middle of COVID to have such an amazing event that the kids were involved in, and they're always, as Gina said, you always feel like you could be in New York, really, when you come to the St. Peter's kind of show. So it was really great that we managed to kind of get that in that really busy year. And then look, we also wanted to really highlight the fact that we managed to get our 2 chaplains on board. And, when I talk to some of the chairs of some of the other private schools, particularly at Dio, they've mentioned it a couple of times. They've advertised and tried to get people to come in to provide that pastoral care kind of support for both students and staff, and they haven't been able to find people. So they're really, really jealous of the fact that we managed to get 2 people to come in and the 2 great people that we've kind of got. So, that was something also that I think was really important to kind of celebrate. So I've said it to you before, we work as a community because it's a combination of staff, the families and the students, and that's what kind of makes it work for all of us. Also, 2021, as you know, it was a year of learning as well. So there was some things that, from a board perspective, we needed to learn from, and hopefully, you can feel that now this year in terms of making sure that we've got better engagement, that we're more transparent, and there's better policies and processes and procedures in place to ensure that everyone kind of can feel safe, that anyone can bring up issues, that the way that we work with each other and the way that we support each other is better than it could have been in the past. The WorkSafe review, as we've talked about before, it enabled the board to kind of stop and understand some stuff, and it brought a whole lot of stuff to light. There's probably some questions that you might have in terms of, we've always said that as the final report that was being done independently became available, we would release the recommendations of that. So we just received the final draft of that last week. So it's not that we've been sitting on something, it's just that we haven't actually received it. So that's just in the process of being reviewed before the final one is kind of issued, and then we will release the recommendations that are in that in terms of procedure and policy and process and stuff. So most of that we've already actually seen implemented, but we'll certainly release that as we always said that we would do. The other thing that we did last year, which was really important for the school, was the public apology. And, I think for me personally, I ended up having a lot of conversations, probably almost 100 conversations with ex-students about the experiences that they'd had, and not all of them were great. But I think in the context of time and for some of them having the opportunity that the school was acknowledging that some of the events had taken place and that they had an opportunity to talk about it, and also to access the listening service, we have really touched a lot of people's lives, and we've enabled them to address some terrible things that have happened in the past, and move through that. Now, there's still some ongoing conversations and some additional work that we've got in place around that. I think we need to think really carefully as an institution moving forward about the appropriateness of naming things in the school after individuals, and maybe we need to think about how we can better celebrate those that have come before us, and keep a record and acknowledge them without kind of necessarily naming individual buildings all the way that we have in the past, because through this kind of process, in a couple of cases it's potentially a little bit complicated what we do now. So just to let you know that there is a process in place around that. There's a committee that's involving a whole range of people that will be kind of looking at how we address those kind of issues. And there's also a sense that we should be thinking about some form of remembrance in terms of something to remind ourselves about, something that didn't go as well as it could do, to help us moving forward, to remind ourselves of that, to make sure that those kind of things can't happen again. But I think the other thing that came out is that it really reinforced the positive element of a lot of the investment that's gone on in terms of some of it's quite subtle, but moving to glass doors throughout the school, some of the training and the policy support, and even things like is it Stymie? I'm going to get the name wrong. App and the Report-It.Now kind of framework. Those are all also additional responses to make sure that we've got a safe environment and people feel empowered to be able to come forward and raise things if they're of kind of concern. So I'll just pause there. Is there any questions over that 2021 thing that anyone might want to raise?
Just to help you out, John.
It's all right. If there's no questions, you don't have to make one up. Yeah.
So reflecting on 2021, and there are a lot of learnings. What is the key learning, do you think? From your perspective, what is that key takeaway learning that is going to steer us forward, do you think? Is it in a number of areas, or is there a big picture learning we want to take away?
I think there's a lot of areas that we've learnt from, but I think, I keep referring back to the partnership between staff, parents and students, and I think it's about relationships. And, as beautiful as St. Peter's is as a physical campus, it's kind of meaningless if we're not a community that kind of looks out for each other and supports each other and supports the development of each other. And I think that's probably, from my perspective, one of the biggest learnings. And I think, and in fact the next slide addresses this. I think, the board perhaps in the past has been a closed shop. It's often been focused about financial sustainability or, material buildings and those kind of things, and often hasn't, I don't think, been clear enough about the absolute real value being in our people. And so I think, for me, that's one of the biggest learnings, that, St. Peter's is as good as its people are and as good as we treat each other. So I think, if you go to our special character, if you go to how we're here to help people and young people learn, but also how can we support each other to learn. So to me, that would be the biggest learning. I think we had lost touch in some cases with each other, and we had some processes and procedure in place that meant that it was hard for everyone to feel safe and feel cared for kind of in that environment. So, moving on to that, a lot of questions have often come through about, how does the board appoint board members and who gets to be on it and how does it all work? And look, it's, I didn't know myself clearly until we got involved. And the St. Peter's Constitution is actually covered by its own piece of legislation that's governed by Parliament, which means two things. One, it's really complex to change anything because it requires a change in an act of Parliament. But also it means that the rigidity that kind of sits there means that it can quickly fall, I guess, out of tune with what's going on with the rest of society, so it can become a little bit dated. But look, I do think, we do need to look back, and we do need to realise that I think previously the board does have a rich history, and the facilities that we do have and the services and experiences that we kind of offer are a result of some of that. As I just said, it's often and sometimes operated as a closed shop, and that is for a range of reasons. And and I think society really has changed its expectations now, is that we need to operate in a much more open and transparent manner. So modern governance is not about a closed boardroom. Modern governance is about engagement with the community and the people who are involved in that kind of institution. And because of that, we're wanting to really make sure that we've got continual greater transparency and accountability for how we do things, why we do things, and where we're going in terms of organisationally. So what we are doing is, we're moving to a much more away from the old boys kind of style of governance to a much more competency-based governance kind of model. So a lot more of what you would expect to see in terms of a professionally run board. Yes, we want to make sure there's a mixture of people who've been through the school, who've got children in the school, who've got educational kind of elements, but that's not enough. People also need to bring competency and the ability to kind of contribute to a governance and a business, because St Peter's is not a small school. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of assets, and an OPEX budget of 34 million a year, plus property development and other things which run into that, potentially hundreds of millions as well. So it's not a small scale, small rural school kind of arrangement. It's actually a business that requires a mixture of professions, from the teaching and learning, making sure that we've got great insight into that and that that's prioritised, because that's why we are here, through to some of those more professional kind of services. So, there's a lot of that going on. The other thing that we've brought in is that we're trying to move to much longer term forecasting. So it appears that in the past, the annual conversation around setting of fees or some of the priorities have been just that. They've been a little annualised, and we haven't been thinking forward enough or thinking strategically enough. So the other thing that we're trying to do is move things into much longer term timeframes, and that includes our investments, but that also includes with, where are we going in terms of our curriculum, and what investments do we need to make in terms of our staff and our capability and upskilling of staff, or new types of people kind of coming in to support that. So that's a much longer term piece. We're also looking for a lot more transparency. I think for some of us that have joined the board more recently, it's been a little confronting, kind of asking questions around, well, where are the scholarships? Who gets a scholarship? Or, how is the resourcing spread across the school between arts or sports or the academic kind of piece? And so, we're working really hard to try and bring a lot more transparency into that. So as a fee-paying parent, I need to know where my fees are going. As a staff member, you should be able to understand clearly how different parts of the school are being resourced, and it should feel equitable, so that that the resourcing is spread equally across all parts of the curriculum, and that in some cases where we've got services that are serving a few rather than those services that are serving many, we might need to think about how we fund those a little bit differently. So you'll hear and see over the coming months a lot more detail coming out around this. Did I put in bursary? No. We've really in our minds started to think about splitting scholarships and bursaries. So thinking about how do we help people who couldn't afford the fees of a private school to ensure that we've got diversity within our community, alongside needing to really acknowledge and celebrate those people who achieve great things. Now, that could be at a very personal level in terms of achieving a personal goal, not necessarily being the best at something in a category, but actually seeing a significant shift in an individual's achievement. And that should be equally as celebrated in some cases as being the best, of something. So you'll see a lot more of that. We've moved to having regular quarterly meetings between the Parents Association, the Foundation and the alumni. And, to me that was kind of a surprise that we weren't kind of interacting at that level more regularly. And I think we've had a couple of those meetings and they've all been received really well. And there's been some great dialogue that's kind of come out of that. And that also means that a lot of those entities that are often, trying to fundraise or trying to bring in additional resource for the school, we can now start to align everybody's efforts so that we're supporting things. If you take the new tech block, there's a whole lot of stuff we need to food tech. There's a whole lot of stuff we need to put in that. And so maybe, the different groups can support and work together to kind of do that, rather than what we've had in some cases is some quite random arrangements in terms of funding. We're also working really hard to re-establish some key relationships. So with the diocesan, with our fellow Anglican private schools in and around Waikato, with the national private school network, but also really importantly with iwi and local community. Because it seems like we've gone through a period where the school, in some cases, has been a little bit closed shop. And, once again, moving in a modern kind of way, that's something that we need to kind of open up on and focus a little bit differently. So I'll pause there again. Are there any thoughts or questions that anyone has on any of those kind of comments in terms of board and how we're moving? It's all right, you don't have to jump in. If there's none, that's fine. Okay, keep moving. So I also just wanted to talk a little bit about the targeted, I've said targeted and high performance there, but it's just to make sure that people understand how the board is now arranged. So we've got a number of subcommittees. So rather than trying to do everything in one committee, we've broken the board down and we've got people who are taking a leadership role and engaging staff and others to focus in on around some areas. So the education committee that Graham has been leading has been undertaking the education ethos piece, which has been, looking at, well, what is the St. Peter's offering and how do we develop that and ensure that it's maintained kind of moving forward. Emily is leading the people and culture, which is, working across the organisation to make sure that we've got all the right resource in place to ensure that you're all supported to continue to develop, and also to make sure that as we bring new people into the school that they're going to fit with our culture and that they've got the skills and I guess the attitude that we see as being the St. Peter's kind of way, rather than just being technically able. We need people who can kind of fit in socially as well. There's the digital committee, which is not an IT strategy, so it's not about overhead projectors. It is about how we can digitalise a lot of what we're doing. Health and safety, which Monique is leading, which is just making sure our environment is as safe as it can be. And that's led to, as I've said at the bottom, the fact that we've got a functioning farm and some relatively complex multi-use in terms of users, facilities, that will bring with them a range of risk. And, perhaps having them all sitting under one school board's not the most appropriate way. So we're going through a process of looking about how we might move the group around a little bit to ensure that we can manage those risks well. Yes, Jed. Oh, I've got a whole slide on that, so you just have to wait. No, it's coming. Is that all right? Yep. Trust me. The new software update that's required, is it? No, it's just come up on my screen. So it's like, what? It's new software available for this Apple, yeah. So the new leadership structure, I think we've talked, and that's kind of been shared with you. I mean, some of this information is really targeted at the parents kind of tonight. But I think, just to reinforce that, we're wanting to make sure that we've got the right structure in place, and the structure is going to enable us to do the best that we can with the resources, the people, and to ensure that the experience is really the best that we kind of can. We've acknowledged that actually the school has grown, the group has grown, so running a school, the academic, the teaching and learning piece, alongside boarding, alongside a whole lot of world-class kind of sporting facilities and a farm and other things, is that really the role of just a school principal? I say just a school principal, but I mean it in the sense that, maybe that's a broader brief. And so what we've done, as you know, with the structure, we've moved it, so we've got a new head of school who will be focused on the teaching and learning kind of element of the school, and obviously there'll be a range of direct reports to that person. And then we've split out a new role, which is to provide strategic capacity around the commercial elements and to make sure that we get the structure right, and to also make sure that we're maximising the way that we run those from efficiency through to being safe. And then we want to make sure that we've also got the right kind of management services to support both the school and the commercial kind of operations as well. So that's kind of the structural stuff. Any questions on any of the structure? Yeah.
When talking to the parents later this evening, how will you distinguish between who the head of the school is compared to the campus principal? Because I think that's the part for me that is a bit unclear.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a really good question, actually. So I think, look, what we've been talking about, as the offering, the academic, the teaching and learning offering that St. Peter's has got is pretty diverse, and, it's going to get even more diverse and more complex. So we want to make sure that we're offering the best that we can. So as a student coming here, you've got the opportunity to access the broadest range of experiences that you can to help you leave as the best rounded kind of student as you could be. We need to make sure that we're thinking ahead and we're thinking strategically. At the same time, we also need to make sure that we're operating day to day as efficiently as we can. So the two roles are split in that kind of sense, that we have a strategic role, so the head of school has to have that big picture, periscope up, looking forward, where are we going? What kind of people are we going to need? What kind of resources are we going to need? What kind of marketing are we going to need to be able to talk to students that are kind of coming through? That takes a reasonable amount of headspace, and it's hard to have the headspace to do that when you're also managing a school day to day. So it is splitting those two roles out. They will have to be a team. They're going to have to work hand in hand to make sure that what happens today is linked to what's happening tomorrow. But it is about ensuring we've got that strategic capability. So there's an operational leadership role, which is really, really crucial as well. And we've got that strategic kind of role as well. So hopefully that makes some sense, but that's certainly how we have thought about it and how we're talking about it.
So as staff, will we be a step removed from head of school then, with our focus, our go-to person, our leader at whatever the front is the campus principal?
Well, to me, it should be, both those people should be really visible, day to day, but the person who will be responsible for the day-to-day operating will be that campus principal. So it's still a really crucial role, and like I said, it's leading that day-to-day operational piece. But the head of school also needs to be visible as well. It can't be a role that's locked away in a room, just thinking about forwards. But it's someone who's got the time to move around and meet with individual staff or faculties and talk about tomorrow as well as talking about today. So it's having that headspace, and even just meeting with Julie today, and we were talking about so much of the stuff that's going on, and it's always been that tension about, I just haven't got enough time to think about that, but it's really important we get that right. But what we need to do today is we need to do this, this and this. So, for a school like St. Peter's, we need to make sure we've got both. Yeah. How it works out on the day, it's going to come down to people as well, though, isn't it? So we can draw it on a bit of paper, but it's also going to be about how those relationships work and the personalities of the people involved. So, we're really focused on that to make sure that we get the right kind of people into those kind of roles as well. I touched on before about the Education Committee, and it was just a little bit more information around that. So, the committee's really been looking at and trying to answer some of those kind of questions, and it's already consulted with a really wide range of stakeholders, and it's, unsurprisingly, it's confirmed that actually a whole lot of what we've got in place is kind of right. We're doing all the right kind of things, but there's an opportunity to kind of tweak bits and pieces of it and make it a little bit different. So there's going to be further engagement internally with yourselves in terms of co-design, and there'll also be further kind of connection and work externally as well in terms of connecting with other parents and industry in terms of what people are looking for in terms of graduates and so forth. So that work is ongoing. Now, Jed, the boarding review. So I think, one of the things that's become really apparent, and I think COVID has really exaggerated the speed of change, is the fact that what people are looking for from a boarding perspective is changing. So, St. Peter's was set up originally as a prep kind of boarding arrangement with younger boys that were kind of coming in from that, and then over the years it's kind of grown. I mean, it's now one of the largest co-ed boarding experiences in New Zealand, but it's also been a boarding experience that's actually been shrinking at the same time. And so I don't know whether you can read those numbers, but even since 2019 we can see that the percentage of the kids at school who are boarding has shrunk from 34 to 30%, and there's been a significant shift obviously with change in mix. So we've seen a large drop off in foreign students, but we've also seen a significant drop off in younger students, and so that's what's led to us making the call to withdraw the younger boarding arrangements, because we're also really committed to not mixing age groups. And it's interesting because if you go back through some of the historical abuse stuff, it's really clear when the school moved to a co-ed environment and also moved to not mingling the age groups, there was a significant reduction in kind of some of the things that were going on that we wouldn't like to see kind of going forward. There's some real big questions in terms of what does boarding look like moving forward. Like, there's been some real questions from parents about, is boarding a 7-day event or a 5-day event? We're not sure. Sometimes it feels like kids are encouraged to go home on the weekends or go stay with friends. And so I think we need to be really clear in our own minds about what does that look like. There's also, and Jed, you've shared a lot of this with us, if you look at some of the Australian boarding schools, they've moved to co-ed boarding, which, when you say that out loud, there's often a shocked look on people's faces about how could that work. But, as you could think about it with older students, the last year at school boarding compared to first year boarding at university, the major difference is you've still got people to help you make decisions, and there's less alcohol, hopefully. So, there's an opportunity for us to help people in that transition, to help them start to think. So when we look at some of the examples in some of those other schools elsewhere, that's the kind of experience that they've started to build, shared smaller living groups and shared kind of co-ed spaces, so that it's not, and people have got the opportunity to kind of learn and live that. We've also got the opportunity that often we get accused with our marketing, which always focuses on the girls' boarding experience, that when the boys turn up, they're not quite the same as it is in the photos. So, we need to be really clear about what kind of environment do we want to be providing for any child that's kind of coming here in the boarding kind of space. So we're also going to be we're looking at bringing in some external support. In fact, we were just talking about that, getting a small advisory group together and some parents and some students, and starting to design medium to longer term what does boarding and what does the boarding offering from St. Peter's look like. And there's a few myths in here that, and I've said that in that second bullet point, often people go, oh, well, it's all these farmers' kids from Hawke's Bay or stuff, and it's just not. Our biggest cohort is from Auckland, and that's probably the co-ed nature of boarding. That's, because there is no co-ed boarding available up there. And so, the nature of our borders has changed significantly kind of as well. So that's a little bit of where we're going with boarding. Is that, you got a few more for me? Yep.
I suppose relating back to the previous slide, John, good to see boarding as a focus. And I just wondered whether there was any thought around having a supplement on the board that looked at boarding.
Yeah, that focuses in on the boarding, yeah.
Some key focuses that you had up there, and boarding obviously, well, that slide's going to be a pretty big focus for some group. So
I'll go to this slide because I think we've tried to address that a little bit in terms of the direct report. So, we've got learning in terms of the campus principal and that day-to-day operational role. We've got living, which is the director of boarding. So if you're choosing to live here within St. Peter's, what does your living experience look like? Now, that's not just about borders, but we need to focus on that. We've got the co-curriculum kind of role, which is how do we play? So if you think about it, we want to make sure that we've got a complete balance. And if you go back to body, mind and spirit, or you think about, learning, living and playing, we've tried to make the structure mirror what we kind of see as the strategic kind of priorities kind of within the school. Now, in terms of how we organise ourselves at the board level, it may be that we end up with subcommittees that look a little bit different once we're a little bit clearer on what that long-term boarding offering looks like. But at this moment in time, we're trying to reflect it at this level, and we'll get that review kicked in, and that will hopefully take us to the next place. I talked briefly about digital, but just because this is the one I get most excited about, I'll talk about it a little bit more. We're wanting to make sure with this digital piece that we're really preparing kids to be digital natives in the world that they live in. So, they get to consume 1 million times the amount of data and information that we did when we went through school, and they get it thrown at them really quickly. Most of them are going to end up in careers where being digitally capable is going to be really critical, and also being able to harvest and use information and data is going to be really critical. So we need to make sure that our learning environment, doesn't matter what part of the school or what part of the curriculum, has that kind of built into it. And I go back to, it's not about using an overhead projector. It really is about, as we're competing in sports, or we're riding around the velodrome, or we're out learning about farming, what data and information is available for us to kind of harvest and help kids learn in real life situations, how we can bring that back in and then start to use that in other disciplines or other kind of ways. So we've got a unique environment in which we've got access to a lot more than what a lot of other schools have got, and we want to make sure that we've got a digital environment that makes best use of that. So we're putting together an advisory group. We've got the CEO of Spark Health, who's actually a medical doctor who works 1 day a week in ED in Middlemore, and the rest of the time he runs Spark Health. So he is got a finger in real world, but also a real strategic vision in terms of, helping and enabling people to kind of move forward. We've got a similar person from AWS who is in the Asia Pacific team who will bring in that kind of understanding. And we're just working on an educationalist, so the person that we were hoping could be available, she's not, but we're hoping she'll give us some names. And we're also talking to a couple of employers that kind of come in. So with that advisory group, we're wanting them to kind of work over a relatively short period of time to help us build out a long-term strategy on what being digitally enabled looks like for St. Peter's and how we can integrate that. What does the investment look like? How do we need to support and train people? What kind of things does it mean that we need to kind of do differently? So I think that's another really exciting kind of piece, because I think we're in a space at St. Peter's where we're incredible, the online learning and the experience that we offered many people. When I talk to people, colleagues, friends around New Zealand, what our kids got to experience from you guys through lockdown was world class. It just hands down beats what most schools offered. And that's one version of being digital. But it's not quite what we're talking about here. This is about how we, use information and teach and learn a little bit differently. So moving on to the financial kind of position of the school. Often I think this has been a little bit of a black box. I don't know whether anyone's ever got up and really talked about the finances before in terms of how the whole school kind of works. But we think it's really important that everyone does have an understanding of some of the maths and stuff around it. So what you've got up there, you've got, the actual income and our expenses. And then what's kind of been left over in terms of EBITDA, but also what we've needed as CapEx to both maintenance. So, Darren trying to make sure that the downpipes all work and the lights are on and all of that kind of thing, through to, needing to invest and continue to grow the campus and making sure that we've kind of got in that place. And you can see that, COVID took a bit of a swipe. We deliberately made decisions in 2020 and 21 to rebate fee-paying parents while we continued to provide an online experience. There were some costs that went down. So food, for example, we weren't serving up a couple of thousand meals a day. But there were a lot of fixed costs. But at the end of the day, that cost us a bit. There's other, there's increasing labour costs, there's CPI, there's all those other things that kind of keep coming through. And sitting on the other side of this is the fees, and the fees that as a parent you end up paying. And, when we start to forecast those forward, and we can see that those fees level will be getting to, will have to get to the $30,000 a year mark, that's a pretty significant number, and that means that it, potentially becomes prohibitive for some families to be able to afford that. So we're constantly having to weigh up how we can kind of get the balance kind of right in that space. If we look at, where different parts of the funding kind of come from, about 90% of it comes through fees. So, we're really, really heavily reliant on parents choosing deliberately to send their kids here and paying those fees. There's a little bit of money that comes in from the government. Now, that my crude understanding of it, and it's so bureaucratic that you need a degree in bureaucracy to understand it, I think, properly, but it's a small fixed fund of money which kind of shrinks with CPI and hasn't been added to for a number of years, and it's distributed out against the total number of students that are in private schools around New Zealand, which has been growing, but the pool hasn't been growing accordingly. So we see that contribution shrinking on a regular kind of basis. There's some other income that we kind of get in terms of services and donations and some rental kind of income, and then there's some income that comes from our trading kind of entities. And some of those things that we need to kind of look at and work out how we could do that a little bit better and a little bit differently. And I think I might have missed it on one of the other slides, but there was also a comment in there about we also need to make sure that these entities that we're running, so whether it's the pool or the gym or equestrian, they are here for school first. So, one of the other criticisms that we sometimes get from parents is I'm sending my child, and, in the book it says they've got access to all these amazing facilities, and they get here and they can't get in the pool because it's full of other people who aren't actually from the school, or they can't get a horse into the thing because we've got horses that are not student horses in there and so forth. So one of the things that we want to be really committed to is making sure that all our facilities are here for school first, and that we've got real clarity about who has access and when. So boarders should be able to swim in the afternoon of a hot summer day, and swim clubs and swim organisations really need to work around that. But I don't think we've been that deliberate over the last few years, and some of that stuff's got a little bit murky. And so we need to reset some of that stuff while at the same time trying to maximise the partnerships that we can kind of have with those external kind of parties. So is there any questions around any of that? I'll just pause there before I go into the last couple of slides, and then David's going to talk about the subdivision a bit. Yeah.
Just kind of looking back on the previous slides and how that connects with this, saying that the revenue to the school is provided practically 90% by the fee-paying parents paying their fees.
Yep.
I'm just wondering how that ties in with the previous slide where you talked about closer relationships with the other private schools, Anglican private schools in the area and outside, who are essentially competing with us, or we're competing with them. I know that we've tried to build closer relationships with some of those schools in the past, and it's potentially, you could say, backfired to a certain extent. So I was wondering what those relationships you're hoping to build might look like, and what you're hoping to gain from that, other than us basically getting rid of our USP or sharing our databases that could negatively impact on our ability to generate that 90% in the future.
Sure. So I think there's a couple of things. One, and you know this better than I do, it's kind of almost enroll with your midwife at the moment in terms of if you want to get in. So I think across any of the private schools, the demand for them is going up. And I think as the borders are reopened, we're going to see additional pressure coming through with international students coming back into the mix. So one, I think demand will probably if you also look at the projected growth in populations, we're going to see supply really struggling to keep up with demand over the next few years. So I think that's one thing. Two, what we are looking at, yes, in a way they are competitors, but people will often choose to go to St Paul's for different reasons than going to St Peter's. And there's different experiences and there's different things that kind of occur. But, when I just take those two schools as an example, when I sit down and talk with their chair and their principal, there's some things that they would love to do, but they don't have the scale to do it. And there's some things that we would like to do, and we don't have the scale to do it. So there could be joint things that we could create as experiences or services or curriculum things that we could jointly fund and jointly build. And while that would take a level of trust and a different approach than what's been there in the past, I really don't think that we're going to end up in a situation, St. Paul's can't grow much more, they don't have any land. We've got oodles of land, so we can build and, create different kind of experiences here. So I think it's about developing those relationships differently than they have been in the past and looking for opportunities to create, where possible, joint things that could be put in place. Examples: neither school at the moment could afford to employ a data scientist. Yet I go back and talk about digital being really important. So how can we teach, data science when we can't even afford a low-level data scientist to be involved in that? So if you started to think about building a collective digital academy across a number of schools with involvement from AWS or Microsoft or others, you could then start to build an experience that a number of the schools are contributing to, but none of them could afford to run in their own kind of way. So, look, we haven't committed to anything. We're just open to having conversations differently. It's the same with industry. There's a number of conversations where, industry, in my own experience in health, often people completing nursing degrees, you couldn't put them on the front line. They could do a range of kind of social elements of nursing, but they didn't have the basics, because the curriculum and the training system had been kind of hijacked with a range of kind of things. And so a lot of employers are saying that people that are coming out. So there's a lot of people now that are not going through tertiary, they are going through micro-credentialing in organisations as they step into them. And so they're wanting to be able to reach further back into the education system to get smart young people and drag them into different employment arrangements which include ongoing learning for them. So there's opportunities for us to create partnerships with industry, and that could be from civil engineering through to, the digital space, through to even medicine, where they're starting to think a little bit differently and not always sitting with and sticking with the traditional learning tracks. So, but those are all the things we need to explore and think a little bit differently about. The world is changing really rapidly, and I think, the historical way of, few private schools competing with each other in what we see as a relatively small area, when you look at the growth that we're experiencing, the number of houses that are being built and the wealth that's coming into this part of the country, I don't think we're going to have a problem with filling the school. You can prove me wrong in a year or two if we got that wrong, but yeah. It is, and it is complex, isn't it? Because and I think as we've talked about and others, we also, I think we do an incredible job of really supporting people who have different learning needs, and that's a little bit different than how some of the other schools approach it. So, we need to carefully manage that so that we don't end up with in a situation where we can't properly support everybody. We need to be really deliberate about how we move forward as well. Yeah. Any other questions?
John, just
Yeah.
the money question as well.
Yeah. Is this about your salary again? Yeah.
How aspirational should we be getting in terms of trying to offer that world-class experience? It does seem like, and I know that the board ultimately have responsibility for the financial management, but it does seem like a handbrake on certain things that are really slowing us down as an organisation in terms of where we'd like to be. And I think parents could be asking some of those questions as well. It might be questions around, say, the dining hall facility, it might be questions around performing arts, or some emails I've been receiving on the condition of sports venues and things like that.
Yeah.
All which require quite a significant capital investment.
Well, look at that.
Looks great.
So I think, look, and David will talk about this a little bit more. I think, one of the things that the board has been trying to do strategically is say, well, you can see the kind of almost hand-to-mouth relationship with the fees and our operational costs. But, you know, if that's the view that we kind of take as an institution, that's all we can do, then I don't think that's going to get us there. So David will talk in a little bit about what we're doing with the subdivision, and a little bit of what that will enable. But, you know, in short, it's about ensuring that we can continue to build, you know, one of the most amazing campuses, but also support some of the most amazing learning experiences in a way. So there's things like building, and we know that the food hall is a problem, and we know that the arts is, you know, we need to develop that. And so that is on the long-term track. The subdivision piece is going to enable that. But what we're trying to do in that space is build an endowment fund that's not just selling the family jewels to fix a few things tomorrow. We want to build a fund that will give us an intergenerational opportunity to continue to build. And so the sums of money that are going to come through in there and that we will invest will enable these kinds of developments to occur on an ongoing basis. He says very confidently, looking at David, you know, that we've got this all right. But no, seriously, it's, you know, that this is the strategic goal that we have. And, you know, this is the thing that we've got, which is, I think, a little bit different from some of our competitors, is that we've got the ability to use some of our assets really, really differently. And at the moment, we've kind of kept our assets locked up in one style of investment, and that was a dairy farm. And while that's produced about $500,000 worth of return a year, that's it in terms of cash. It's provided an educational experience, but, you know, we need to work out how we can mix that and break that up a little bit and get a better return so that we can continue to develop and move forward. Because look, I think that the people on the board all have very bold, well, most of them, apart from, in terms of really bold vision, in terms of where we'd like St. Peter's to kind of get to. And, you know, it comes back to what I said at the start, though. We need to make sure that we've got the right people, so you guys are there with us and engaged. We need to make sure that we're getting the right students and, you know, people who are hungry to learn and can work in this kind of environment. And we need to make sure that we've got resourced, you know, the resources, we've got the physical space, but also the curriculum funded well that we can kind of do that. So there is a real aspirational view within the board. So tight times, COVID's made it a bit tough over the last couple of years. I think we've all got a bit of that. We've got a bit of a ride with, you know, CPI and, you know, Putin's effort in Europe that's kind of impacting on all of us. But we've got a longer term vision and, you know, we are looking forward. So things like food halls and tech rooms and you know, what we do with Schoolhouse in terms of creating more meeting space and so forth. You know, those are relatively short-term kind of things, but some of the strategic pieces that I talked about in terms of some of those committees, in terms of long-term view of boarding and stuff, those are all relatively big-ticket items, and, you know, we want to kind of get that right. Does that help? Just aware of time, and David didn't want too long to talk, so any other questions from me? Otherwise, I'll pass over to David. Yes.
From an external point of view, who's going to be the principal? So, for example, like you look on the Ministry of Education's directory of schools, you've got labelled principal. So, will that be the campus principal or the head of school?
That will be the head of school. And I mean, when we look, we chose the title head of school quite deliberately, because if you look internationally around the private school kind of sector, there's kind of a move away from some of the more traditional kind of titles and names, so, you know, headmistress or headmaster and even principal, to moving to the head of school, and a lot of them are starting to kind of really segment the kind of roles that are played out kind of in the school. So yeah, it'll be the head of school that will take that, and look, we'll just slowly change the education system so that they understand what head of school means. Darren.
I'm just wondering what the process or where the process is with that recruitment for that new structure.
Yeah, so we've engaged Hobson Levy, which is a international recruitment firm, and so they've already started. There's been some ads that have appeared in you know, some of the educational kind of spaces. I think there's an ad going out in the Herald this week, but more importantly, they are shoulder tapping and tapping into an international network of you know, people who could be suitably qualified and starting those kind of conversations. So we're expecting from them, I think it's the end of, where are we now? Partway through next month, the first kind of high-level list. But, you know, they've been emailing, you know, once a week, giving me a bit of an update in terms of where they've been placing ads and who they've been talking to, and they've said that there is a good feed, a good, what was the word they used? You know, there's a good sense of interest that they're getting, and people are kind of responding to that. So that's kind of where that's at the moment.
So with the ultimate goal, that model in place for beginning of next year?
Yeah, look, the reality is, you know, if we appoint it internally, then we're away really quickly. If it's an external appointment, then it'll depend on the individual. So, you know, most people in the kind of role will be in a role, and they'll probably have to give 6 months notice. So it'll be early next year before they would come in. Yep. David, your turn.
No. So what we did is when we were considering what was going to happen with the land holding that the school has that's able to be developed from a residential perspective, we started to look at what's the best place or where's the best place to put this. I mean, historically on the board, it's been a very busy agenda, dealing with not only the core business that is the education, but all the other bits that are sort of mixed in with this campus that John has alluded to. So looking at what the step change we're about to make, it's given the opportunity to sort of sit back and reflect as what is the best structure for this. When you're getting into commercial operations and subdivision operations, there's an elevated degree of risk, there's a different skill set, and we didn't want what was just part of what we do to be overshadowing and crowding the agenda and the attention of trustees when ultimately core business is education for St Peter's. So we've taken the opportunity to establish the Ruru Endowment Trust that was registered, I'd say, probably 12 months ago now, and it's got its charitable status as approved. It's essentially there established for the benefit of the school. And the trust board has the ability to appoint 3 trustees, and then that board essentially can bring in another couple depending on the skill set that's needed. The trustee appointments that are made by the St Peter's School Trust Board don't necessarily need to be St Peter's School trustees. It can be, but it can be other people because we acknowledge that it is a different skill set. So that gives you an idea, and I suppose it's linking into the structure that John's talked about in terms of commercial operations and some of those that are best suited to be out of the way from core business and not a distraction. So in terms of where we're at with the residential development, what I've done is I've overlaid effectively a bit of a master plan onto a Google map. I'm pretty IT literate. Just to give a sense of where this is, because sometimes when you look at the plans you go, well, where is this in relation to the school campus? So essentially we're looking at all of that land that's to the to the east of the pylons. It sort of goes between there and the Te Awa Life Care. It's an area that has been obviously rezoned by council as part of their structure plan change, so it is a residential zoning. And a few years ago, well, probably a couple of years ago, we actually started to look at the opportunity to sell that land, or part of that land, to raise some funds and let someone else who was more experienced in development undertake that. Since then, 2 years later, things have evolved, and we've essentially entered into a joint venture partnership with the 3 ends of Cambridge to do this development. It is something where essentially the school, because we don't have access to the funds that are required to do such a large-scale development, but we have the land, and we're adverse to risk in terms of taking on a whole load of debt to do this. Essentially, it's a pretty simple setup where we tip in the land, they fund the development, and we share the rewards. Any questions at that point? Just giving you another, so now you sort of understand where it is. This gives you an idea of how it sort of links in with a bit of the contour. Obviously, we've got the main road that you can see coming down towards the river. That will actually sort of underneath that road, there's some pretty big pipes that take all pretty much the stormwater from Cambridge down to the river, and you can see the cycleway will cross down through the bottom there. So it's creating quite a connection to the river and using some of those contours. The big blue area you can see is a bit of effectively a wetland or a stormwater sort of pond that is positioned under the pylons, just to give you a sense of bearings. In terms of that, where we're at with the sort of the master planning, some of the, it's been a lot of time that's been put into this. In particular, Chow Hill have been the sort of the urban planners. They've been engaged across the road with what 3Ms are doing, and also further down the road with the other stuff that I've been involved with from a chartwell capacity. So there's a sense of connectedness and flow across all this new area of Cambridge. Because when you look at what's going on here, we're looking at in the St Peters JV area here. You're around about 300 sections coming out of this development. Looking at obviously using sort of corridors, and you can see a bit of a green going through the middle there. That is where we're looking to create sort of what's referred to as swales and stormwater corridors that also are sort of public amenity to get ease of movement through the subdivision, both across and also down to the river. And there'll be obviously a mix of housing typology. So it's, if you come home one night, and it's dark, you don't walk into the wrong house, which you can. I'd hate to live in north of Hamilton because you get lost. But it creates the different typology of houses that suit different stages in life. So you get a diverse community, really, which what we're about here is building a community. Bit of an idea as well in terms of how some of that green space links in. So while you might say, it looks pretty compact in terms of the middle, there is a reasonable amount of density going in there, but you've got to remember the amount of green space that surround the outside of this subdivision, both connections to the river. We've got all that area under the pylons where there will be a sort of a stormwater swale and management sort of system going through there, but you've got what's referred to as that linear park, big planted banks, and that green link through the middle. So there's been a lot of thought go into this to sort of come up with this sort of plan so far. In terms of what's happening now, you might have noticed that there's a whole lot of trees that suddenly fell over. There's quite a few trees around the Waikato that fell over before the end of April, because the end of April is actually the end of bat season. So the minute you're into May, you can't touch a tree if it's bat sensitive until 1 October. So you need to drop a whole lot of trees so that it doesn't hold things up. So a lot of those trees are along that Cambridge Road area. What's going to be happening along Cambridge Road is where the Te Awa Life Care starts on that boundary of the school. There's going to be a large roundabout going in there. There'll be underpasses, and there'll be quite a significant sort of construction job. We just got through the building of one roundabout. We're now into another one, so the public will really love that. But also the whole what's referred to as enabling works, so cutting down the hill for those big stormwater pipes. So the big stormwater pipes have got to get down to the river, which obviously drains across the road as well. But that cutting of the pipes and getting those contours right, that will be the foundation for the road that will come down through there. And there'll obviously be a few sediment ponds made along the way as well to deal with the sort of the stormwater issue and sediment detention during the construction phase. The pipes down to the river, this is actually something I'm really looking forward to seeing one day, because we're talking about, the last designs I've seen is 3 pipes, each one is 1.4 metres in diameter. So imagine seeing that on full flow. It'll be like our own little Hooker Falls. It'll be quite amazing. But some people say engineers over-engineer things, but I think there'll be an interesting test on that when we get some of these 100-year rain events that happen every 2 years. But that gives you an idea of what to expect. Probably, we're talking about October. Some of this works will be starting, so you'll see things happening. Questions? Just quickly, how does this tie into across the road? Well, because we're obviously joint venturing with 3Ms and they're doing the one opposite, there is that whole connectivity through there. So there is that flow through. Some people think, isn't there going to be a huge oversupply of sections with what's happening there, what's happening here? But in reality, we look at across the road, there's probably about 260 sites coming out of 3Ms because they have about a 4-hectare site at the front there, which is another retirement village, and another area up the back, which is a new primary school. So there's some reasonable sized parks and wetland areas coming through that as well. and then flowing down into ours, which is 300. So you're talking about around about 550 sites. On average, Cambridge, historically about at least 100 sections a year is what's been selling and being developed. So, in our developer forums that we have, the real estate agents are saying Cambridge is now the #1 destination for people moving out of Auckland. Used to be Tauranga, now it's Cambridge. So it's potentially going to continue to build in terms of the demand for the area. What we're looking at doing is we're at some point in the sort of pretty soon is we're going to be developing a website for the subdivision. We're going to be consulting with the local iwi to give it a name and give it a sense of being. But looking to go out to the school community to get those people that are interested in potentially securing a block of land in here, so that there's that little bit of friends and family sort of approach to get people the opportunity to partake sooner before that wider public offering. Any questions?
Will the school be likely to buy any of those sections?
Yeah, look, I think where we're at is we've got land at the moment. You can only sell land once, which is why we've spent so much time thinking about this. It could be, one of the things, and we've got to evolve this thought process on it and how we come up in terms of our wider investment strategy for Ruru. But it could be that we could hold on to 30 or 50 even, and have effectively housing stock that becomes both rentals for families that are coming to bring their kids to the school from out of town and wanting to move here as a family, but also for staff. I mean, there's models certainly internationally where you have an amount of housing available for staff, particularly if you're bringing staff in and they're struggling to get accommodation in Cambridge, or they're young and they can't afford it. So you can actually sort of bring in a bit of a tiered, sort of a subsidised start that then graduates up. So it gives them time to get established, but as the rents go up, encourages them to move on and put down their own sort of routes. But that's it, because that is been a common feature in terms of trying to recruit, when trying to recruit staff, is that housing issue, and having St Peter's families and families of staff being local just enhances and builds that community even stronger. So that is something certainly that is being considered. Also, in terms of the funds that will come out of this development project, we do have that land up by the velodrome. Particularly there's a paddock there that's got a couple of horses in it. Up along there is actually zoned future commercial, going right through to the golf area. So you see what's happening with the velodrome. The velodrome's looking at a stage 2 office build at the moment, and as demand increases over time, building commercial buildings for whatever type of businesses are appropriate to be there, further will enhance revenue streams to, ultimately subsidise what the school does in time. But, we could do this subdivision, we could get a big pile of cash in, we could build some fantastic buildings, and then it would all be gone. And we'd be just left with a massive headache of ongoing maintenance. So it's about how we look to invest the key capital fund here, so that it can grow, but also provide income to support the school going forward as needed.
Will the sections be all released, or is it a staged release?
It's probably a 2-stage. So I don't know if I've got a pointer here. I do. So this bit up the top is probably more of a stage 1. There could be some down here that goes into a stage 1 as this road is built, with further sort of coming on here. I mean, it could be that a lot of the works are done, but they're just staged as in releasing to the market. That will be part of that will be a commercial decision as well, so that we retain control over the release and the price point. Any other questions?
Will there be traffic management issues that our parents and last community community school are?
Probably no more so than when the other roundabout was built. Look, no, in reality, it's probably easier, because what they'll probably do is because the amount of land that they're taking for that roundabout, they can effectively do a diversion while they're building it and then pop it over. But I think most people are becoming a bit immune to it, particularly if you're coming from Hamilton. It's just we live, and anyone coming down from Auckland, it's just, it's traffic or roadworks just seem to be a constant at the moment. All right. Cool.
Thanks, David. So look, thank you everyone. That's kind of what we wanted to share. I really appreciate you coming out to have a listen, and hopefully you found that kind of interesting. But I want any of you always to feel free to approach any of us. Emily can be a bit grumpy if she hasn't had a coffee, but most of us are pretty. No, she's great. We're all really approachable, and we're really keen to kind of hear from you all. So if you see us around, or you want to kind of have a chat with us at any point, please reach out. That's very, very much the way we want to be seen and to be part of the community. And we're always keen to hear your ideas and thoughts and stuff as well. So so look, thanks for your time. We'll be here at the end if you want to chat to any of us, and we look forward to seeing you again. And thank you again for everything that you're doing for the school. So cheers.